The day of Dawn Walker's wedding had been described by everyone who attended as nothing short of perfect. The sky was a clear blue, with sunlight pouring over the rolling fields that surrounded the countryside church. Guests arrived dressed in bright colors, carrying small gifts and wearing smiles that reflected the joy of the occasion. Dawn herself was radiant, her white gown shimmering as she walked down the aisle, her veil trailing behind her like a soft cloud. The church bells rang as if to announce not just the union of two people, but the start of a storybook life together. For those in the pews, it was a moment that seemed untouchable by sorrow or tragedy. Daniel Brooks, the groom, stood proudly at the altar. To many, he looked like the very picture of devotion, eyes fixed on Dawn as though she was the only person in the world. Friends whispered about how lucky she was to have found him, a man whose charm had won over not only Dawn but also her family and friends. Their vows were spoken with steady voices, hands clasped tightly as promises were exchanged. When they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause, a cheer that seemed to shake the walls of the church. The reception that followed was just as grand as the ceremony. A large country hotel hired exclusively for the event became the backdrop for laughter, dancing, and endless toasts. The dining hall was decorated with white roses, golden ribbons, and tables groaning under the weight of food and champagne. Dawn and Daniel were never left alone for long, constantly pulled into photographs, surrounded by friends insisting on one more dance or one more drink. Guests spoke about how they could see the love between the couple in every glance, every small touch. As the evening wore on, the celebration only grew louder. A band played joyful tunes that sent people spinning across the floor, while children fell asleep in corners, their cheeks sticky with cake. Dawn seemed caught between exhaustion and excitement, her gown slightly wrinkled but her smile unbroken. Daniel poured drinks for anyone within reach, always quick with a joke or a pat on the back. The atmosphere was so full of warmth that it was impossible for anyone to imagine the night could end in anything but happiness. When midnight arrived, the couple made their way to the bridal suite upstairs, surrounded by cheers and confetti thrown by the last of the guests. The hotel staff recalled how they had looked tired but content, leaning against each other as they disappeared down the hallway. The door closed quietly behind them, sealing off what everyone assumed would be the beginning of a beautiful marriage. But the perfection of that day carried an eerie weight, as though it had been carefully staged to distract from something far darker waiting in the shadows. While family and friends departed the hotel still glowing from the celebrations, the bride and groom's story was already twisting toward tragedy. What looked like the happiest night of Dawn's life was destined to become her last, and the memory of that perfect day would soon be remembered not for its joy, but for the horror it concealed. The morning after the wedding began quietly, as most mornings do after a night of celebration. The hotel corridors were hushed except for the sound of suitcases rolling across the carpet and the occasional laughter of departing guests. Some carried leftover slices of cake wrapped in napkins, others spoke fondly of the dancing and the speeches that had gone on late into the night. For them, the event was over, the couple was starting their new life, and everything seemed exactly as it should be. The bridal suite on the top floor remained closed, and no one thought much of it. After all, newlyweds were expected to take their time, and it was easy to assume they were still resting after a day that had stretched long into the early hours. By mid-morning, however, the silence surrounding the suite began to feel unusual. The cleaning staff, who had been instructed not to disturb the couple, noticed that not a sound came from inside. No footsteps, no laughter, not even the shuffle of movement. Breakfast trays delivered outside the door were left untouched, and hours slipped by without any sign of the pair. The staff hesitated to knock, not wanting to intrude on what they assumed was simply privacy, but the unease grew steadily with each passing hour. As the afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the hotel's courtyard, concern turned to worry. Some of Dawn's relatives who had lingered at the hotel to chat and gather belongings realized they had not seen the bride and groom all day. A receptionist, after failed attempts to reach the suite by phone, finally sent a staff member to check on them. Soft knocks at the door brought no reply. Louder knocks followed, still nothing. The silence behind that door was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, unsettling, almost suffocating. It was only after the manager used a spare key that the dreadful truth came to light. The door swung open, and what should have been a room filled with warmth and intimacy was instead frozen in an atmosphere of shock. Dawn Walker lay still on the bed, her wedding gown crumpled as though she had collapsed without warning. Her skin was pale, her hair spread across the pillow like a dark halo. The sparkling jewelry she had worn the night before caught the sunlight streaming through the curtains, giving the scene an eerie contrast of beauty and tragedy. The most haunting detail was the absence of Daniel Brooks. The groom was nowhere to be found. His side of the bed was untouched, his belongings missing, as though he had walked out without a trace. No note was left behind, no explanation, only emptiness. Word spread quickly through the hotel, panic replacing the joy that had filled those halls just hours earlier. Guests whispered in shock, unable to process how the laughter and dancing of the wedding could have ended in death. Police were called, and the hotel, once the stage for celebration, transformed into a crime scene. Officers secured the area, their presence stark against the floral decorations that still clung to the walls. What had begun as the happiest day of Dawn Walker's life was now the subject of a murder investigation, and the mystery of Daniel's disappearance became the center of every question that followed. The disappearance of Daniel Brooks quickly became the focus of the investigation. Police officers traced every possible lead, but the groom seemed to have vanished into thin air. His car was missing from the hotel parking lot, and no one had seen him leave during the night or early morning. Detectives began by interviewing the wedding guests, hoping someone might have noticed something unusual. Yet the stories were the same. Everyone recalled Daniel laughing, drinking, and appearing deeply in love with Dawn. Not one person could remember an argument or a moment of tension between the couple. To those who had celebrated with them, Daniel's sudden absence made no sense. When investigators turned their attention to Daniel's personal life, the carefully crafted image he had built began to unravel. Records revealed that his business, which many believed was thriving, was in fact on the brink of collapse. He had accumulated a mountain of debt that he had kept hidden from friends and family. Loans were unpaid, creditors were pressing, and several of his employees had recently quit, claiming the company's future was uncertain. To outsiders, Daniel had played the role of the successful, confident man, but the truth painted a picture of someone cornered by financial ruin. The discoveries did not end there. Just a month before the wedding, Daniel had taken out a large life insurance policy on Dawn. At the time, it had seemed like a gesture of responsibility, something a cautious husband might do to protect his future wife. But now, in the shadow of her sudden death, it raised chilling suspicions. Detectives began to piece together a motive that was more sinister than anyone wanted to believe. What if Daniel had planned everything? The proposal, the wedding, the promise of a perfect life, not out of love, but out of desperation. The possibility unsettled everyone who knew Dawn. Friends recalled how she had spoken with excitement about her marriage, never once doubting the man she was about to spend her life with. Family members struggled to understand how she could have been so deceived. But the evidence continued to point in one direction. Daniel's financial troubles and the insurance payout formed a dangerous combination. Search efforts intensified. Police scoured nearby towns, checked surveillance cameras, and alerted airports and train stations, but there was still no sign of the groom. Each day that passed without a lead deepened the mystery and heightened the tension. The story began to spread beyond the local community, drawing national attention as newspapers ran headlines about the vanished husband and the bride who never saw her first morning as a wife. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the bridal suite in greater detail. Subtle signs suggested that Dawn's death had not been natural. Small bruises marked her skin, and toxicology reports hinted at substances in her system that did not belong there. The findings confirmed what detectives had begun to suspect. Dawn Walker had been murdered, and the prime suspect was her missing husband. The wedding that had once symbolized love and promise was now remembered as the stage for betrayal and violence. Every revelation about Daniel added another layer of darkness, painting him not as a grieving husband on the run, but as a man who had orchestrated a deadly plan. And yet, until he was found, the case remained wide open, and the truth of what happened that night lingered just out of reach. Days turned into weeks as the search for Daniel Brooks continued. Investigators followed every possible lead, chasing sightings that led to dead ends and rumors that proved false. Just as public interest in the case seemed to reach a fever pitch, a breakthrough came. A hiker walking through a dense forest on the outskirts of town reported finding a car abandoned along a dirt path. The vehicle matched the description of Daniel's, and when officers arrived to examine it, their suspicions were confirmed. His car sat hidden beneath branches and leaves hastily covered as though someone had tried to conceal it. Inside were his wallet, his phone, and faint traces of blood smeared across the steering wheel. The discovery sent waves of speculation rippling through the community. Had Daniel staged his escape, or had something far worse happened to him after the wedding? The forest was combed carefully, with search teams working in tight lines to cover every inch of ground. For days they pushed through undergrowth, scoured streams, and dug through soft earth. At first, nothing pointed to Daniel's whereabouts. Then, buried beneath a thin layer of soil not far from where the car was found, investigators uncovered a shallow grave. The skeletal remains inside were not Daniel's. Forensic analysis soon confirmed that the body belonged to a woman who had gone missing nearly 2 years earlier. She was later identified as Emily Harris, Daniel's former fiancée, who had vanished without explanation just months before their planned wedding. The discovery shocked even the most hardened detectives. Until then, Daniel had been suspected of murdering his new bride for money, but now a darker pattern was emerging. Investigators realized that Dawn's case might not have been an isolated crime of opportunity, but part of a far more disturbing history. Emily's disappearance had long puzzled her family, but no evidence had ever pointed to Daniel. In the end, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on all charges. The sentencing brought some measure of closure to those who had lost loved ones, though the pain of their absence could never truly be healed. Dawn's family spoke of her dreams, her kindness, and the cruelty of a life cut short on what should have been her happiest day. Emily's family, after years of uncertainty, finally had the truth about her disappearance, though the knowledge brought little comfort. The story of Daniel Brooks became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving. He had crafted an image of success and devotion, but behind the polished exterior was a man driven by greed and capable of unthinkable acts. Dawn Walker's wedding night, remembered at first for its joy and celebration, would forever be known as the night a fairy tale turned into horror. The legacy of her story lived on in whispered warnings, proof that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who seem the most perfect. So, if you enjoy gripping true crime stories filled with mysteries, secrets, and shocking twists, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Crime Uncovered.